You're listening to the Paul and Philippe podcast. Prepare yourself for loads of unbiased nuances.
How do you think is the newly adding of 6 members to the now called BRICS11 states changing this dynamic of, let's say, power and let's say global alliances within the 5 original BRICS states and within the global South in general?
Yeah, the entry of those, well, the proposal for 6 countries, but at the end only 5 entered because Argentina declined. And
Sure.
so there are 10 at the moment, and there are more than 40 countries candidated to enter. But even the way those countries are entering the BRICS is very, very odd to the Western mind. Because let's say, for example, for the European Union, in order for you to enter in the European Union, you have rules that are being written, and you have some kind of a scenario, a steps-by-step kind of checking lists in order for you to see if you pass through all the tests until the moment that you finally are formally, according to the rule that have been implemented through agreements within the members of the European Union. With the BRICS, it's all informal. They had absolutely nothing written regarding the way, what would be the rules, what would be the criteria to invite more countries to participate from the BRICS. Nothing. That's it. Within the BRICS, there is nothing written. And that's a bit of a difficulty that sometimes you have to assess how things are being run within the BRICS, because there is no concrete, let's say, Carta Magna of the BRICS. There is nothing of the kind. There isn't even a website of the BRICS. You don't have any. You have the BRICS within, for example, the Brazilian government. There will be those who are responsible for maintaining relation with the rest of the BRICS. So within the Brazilian government, we will have the page of the BRICS, as you have the page of the BRICS within the Russian governmental website, and so on. So when they decided that it was time to invite more countries, and guess who was in favor or put that on the agenda? China and Russia. But obviously, because they have their own political interest in gaining more weight and being able to have a better counterbalance. It was not exactly a priority of the Brazilian government at all. Even though they did not oppose to the possibility, it was not something that they would put as a priority, for example. But they decided and reached some kind of an agreement that went through discussion until they reached consensus regarding geographic locality and peculiarities or profile of the countries among the 40 countries that we want to enter, which one are we going to invite first, etc. So they had to go through their own process of negotiation, but totally in a, let's say, informal way. Informal according to the Western principles, because there is no agreement previously signed on the conditions and criteria to enter the BRICS. So it's highly dynamic. As one of the representatives of the Brazilian government, when he was asked the question, but which criteria? Well, we decide together, and we create the criteria according to the interests that we commonly have agreed on, and then we will go through the formalization. That is not a problem. Okay, but at the end, Brazil somehow, within this new configuration of the BRICS, obviously has come maybe a bit isolated. And that's one of the big paradox for Brazil, because Brazil lies in South America. Geographically speaking, is considered Occidental. It has a European colonization history. But when we talk about the West or the North, in terms of politics, South America is not included. It is included in the global South. But even in the global south, they are the white. It's not the white, but at least the nearest from what we call the traditional white culture in many, especially in countries like Argentina, for the southern part of South America. And even though, obviously, in terms of values, societal values, Brazil shares a lot with the West, with the Occident, so to speak, and has very, very few common points with countries that recently entered the BRICS. So a sort of isolation in which Brazil is in a very uncomfortable situation.
Philippe, this makes me question whether the let's say the Brazilian voters and also like the base of PT is actually supporting Lula's endeavors in fostering and strengthening the alliance with the BRICS state. How do you see that?
The strengthening of the BRICS.
Yes. Do you think that most of Brazilian voters that voted for Lula on one side and also the base of the party of PT is actually supporting Lula's endeavors in there, or do you think there's some sort of internal conflicts as well?
Yeah, the most traditional followers of the PT here in Brazil certainly do follow Lula on that indeed. You may, for example, there is a YouTube channel that is run by a big supporter, traditional big supporter. It's called Pepe Escobar. It's very pro Lula, pro PT, and he's always talking about the New World Order, how the BRICS is going to change, and put the interest of the South finally up to front. That we will finally free ourselves from those neo-colonialist Western ways of running the world, etc. So a very heavy ideological speech, and it's very, 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 very famous here. And most of the PT followers follow Pepe Escobar, and they agree with him. Okay, but again, that's just a part of those who voted for Lula in this election. Because another part, I mentioned before, Lula won the election, but he won by very, very tiny majority, 0.1%. 50.1% was his final result. 50.16%, I can't, something like that. So very, very tiny majority. And he had that majority because he could convince a part of the population. Now, traditionally, I would say that about 20 to 30% of the population normally follow Lula and the PT. So it's not a majority; it's a big minority, still minority. So he had to convince or seduce another 25% at least in order to be able to really win the election. So he made a lot of alliances. Understand that the political system here in Brazil is very, very fragmented. There are almost 30 political parties officially registered.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's all made on the basis of negotiation, concessions, and alliances between parties, coalitions, etc. Which is also another big headache once you are in power in order to maintain these coalitions. But it convinced people were deceived by Bolsonaro.
Okay, so this
or
was
afraid.
It was not Bolsonaro. This was his biggest argument to say to get like the rest of the 25% that he needed.
Yeah, all the democratic approach, the risk that Bolsonaro represents for democracy, etc., and the deception during the pandemic due to certain refusal of Bolsonaro to recognize the importance or gravity of the situation. And then it took some time for Brazil to organize itself and finally get access to vaccines, etc. But and his style somehow also had some kind of a prejudice on the part of the population. And so deception or fear, and they did not want Bolsonaro for a second mandate. They did not want Lula specifically, but it was the option that was on the table, so they voted for him. That's somehow what happened in this last election process. Very, very caricature, let's say, of the analysis of these last elections. And Lula is implementing the foreign policy of those 20, 30% of traditional powers.
Mm.
Extremely anti-American, anti-Israel, anti neocolonialism of Western countries, generally speaking, pro-Southern coalition. And that's the line that he's following. And it's being applauded. It will receive a lot of applauses from those powers and a lot of critics from the others. So he's in the coin in terms of internal politics. So, for example, he has lost a lot of popularity recently. He even had a formal meeting in Brasilia with these ministers in order to try to have a better assessment of this problematic, even though he recognized that obviously his popularity went down, and that somehow it is linked to the lack of delivery that was promised during his campaign, even though in terms of economy, at least until the moment, Brazil is quite healthy. It has gone through this last year, 2 years, with relative comfort, let's say. Broadly speaking, it is receiving a lot of foreign investments. It has grown almost 3%, 2.9% in 2023. But
Also,
obviously,
right now, what is the level of inflation right now? Is it going?
it's about 4.5%. So it's within
Acceptable.
the margin that is being given to the central bank. So broadly speaking, the economy is running. Obviously, you have problem as always, even problem regarding the next 6 months, next year, next 2 years, because of certain policies that are being implemented and are worrying certain analysts in terms of the impact it will have on the medium terms of health of the Brazilian economy. That's okay. That's something to debate. But at the moment, this is not certainly what would explain the loss of popularity of Lula. And many points out is positioning in terms of foreign policy, both the pro-Palestinian, pro-Russian, let's say, if not officially acknowledged, through the lack of condemnation, is being seen as a way to try to preserve Putin. He just sent a congratulation for the re-election. Is one of the few countries that did it at the moment.
For the recent elections in Russia, you say?
In Russia. No? So he just sent it about yesterday or the day before yesterday.
Hard to call it actual elections, right?
And yeah, the process of election. Yeah, but is for example, his partnership with Maduro in Venezuela here is also a theme of many critics. But for his followers, it is the politics to follow.
But if Lula is making politics only for, let's say, 20 or 30% that are his hardcore fans, is he not actually ruining his change to gain, like, in case that's possible, yet another presidency? Or is he not actually
that's where I believe there is this understanding in his mind that this is his last mandate, that he wants to let a political legacy, especially in foreign policy, and he wants to be seen as the one who helped and was extremely proficient at building a global South coordination that finally took off and initiated the implementation of a new world order through the new development bank, through the new IMF they pretend to create, a new monetary system that they pretend to create, a new political formulas of a negotiation and the revision of the UN conditions of the decision taking and etc. So it has several agendas regarding that, and is working very, very hard in order to achieve them. And obviously, it is against the interests of the current leaders of the political, the world order, which are the Western society. And in Brazil, those who do not vote in Lula, and part of those who voted in, are certainly much more aligned in terms of understanding values and priority with the Western world or the Occidental world than the counter-proposal that is being led by China through the BRICS, especially since the entry of countries like Iran or Saudi Arabia, with countries with which the local population has absolutely no sense of belonging, so to speak, to the same team. They feel much more belonging to the Occidental team, at least in the medium class.
Also because of religious accordance.
Yeah, that's understand that in Brazil, which is a very Catholic country, but since the last 30 years, the evangelic churches have gained a lot of new followers. I don't know. I wouldn't be able to. I believe that the Catholic Church is still the majority of the population in Brazil, but there is a strong minority of Catholic, well, called the evangelic. But it's the evangelic in the American style. It's not the traditional Baptist, or it's the very gospel evangelic kind of churches, and who are extremely pro-Israel, but for reasons that have nothing to do with Netanyahu or whoever is in power in Israel.
It's religious origins, right?
For the religious dimension of the necessity of having Israel in order to accomplish the word, so to speak, according to the Bible. So they want a strong Israel. Bolsonaro, for example, had a very strong relationship with Netanyahu in Israel during his presidency, because there is this demand. The evangelic are the ones who really normally do not follow Lula at all.
After Lula has been basically comparing Netanyahu's actions with the actions of Nazis in the Holocaust, we've seen a lot of siding of Bolsonaro fans. I think it used to be in Sao Paulo, with not only obviously Bolsonaro, but also with Israel at that time. Do you think, as you just mentioned, because there has been a lot of traditional acceptance and a lot of traditional companionship with Israel, or was this rather just as a counter reaction to Lula's actions in the sense of the enemy of our enemy is our friend?
Yeah, yes, there is a bit of that very binary kind of positioning, understanding that polarities are strong everywhere. So if you're not with me, I will understand that you're against me. You do not have the right to stay in the middle. And for example, in terms of foreign policy, there is a very big tradition of the Brazilian diplomacy to see itself and act as a bridge and a neutral party that will help resolving whatever conflict differences that may rise on a peaceful way. But then for that, you cannot, certainly, it is dangerous for you to reveal a preference. To strengthen that according to your own opinion, one side is right, the other side is wrong, because then you cut the possibility of being a bridge. And somehow you're being accused of duplicity, so to speak. So you want to be the intermediary, at the same time, you are pro-Palestinian. You want to be the solver of the crisis in Ukraine, but you are pro-Putin, or being accused of being pro-Putin or whatever, and so on. So this positioning, strong positioning of Lula is not certainly something that came out of the traditional structure of the Itamaraty, so the Minister of Foreign Relations, which is, again, very neutrality-oriented, certainly not taking sides in that so formal way.
This has been a very, very interesting analysis by you so far. So thanks a lot about this, Philippe.